It's the second day of December the 2nd, 2021. I hope everybody's doing extraordinarily good, if that's possible this day and age. There's a study just came out of China where they've done modeling on Fukushima tanks that are going to be dumped for 30 or 40 years. This is their version of it. I'm going to introduce you to the real version of what happened over the last 10 years. The nuclear industry. Atoms for peace. Atoms for humanity. The A-10 Warthog only shoots depleted uranium munitions. It shoots 1.5 tons a minute, and it's the animosity equivalent of 44,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs, according to a Japanese physicist at a conference in 2013. It's an incredible betrayal, because all that shoots is dirty bombs. Dirty bombs, that's what it shoots. Not like dirty bombs or almost dirty bombs, but actual dirty bombs. It's an absurd betrayal. Celebrated physician, Fukushima has humanity on the brink of a possible worldwide nuclear holocaust. And the effects on our health are incomprehensible. Here's another headline to think about. Deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. So if your coal plant breaks down, do you think you're going to see those connotations? Or your oil plant, or your gas plant, or carbon? Say they sequester a lot of carbon, which, plants need to grow. Deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. This is a real model of radiation in the Pacific Ocean. This was from 2013. Let's just get started with
Maybe
that.
Worse than thought. Studies from last year indicate that radioactive water will contaminate the entire Pacific Ocean in just 6 years. Kim Min-ji reports.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German Marine Research Institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
So in just 6 years, you can see the date on it, August 28, 2013. Well, today, this study showed up. It's a team from a university in China, and what they wanted to do was play down what's going on. We'll talk about that tonight and I'll explain it for everybody. Think about this headline from 2012. Cesium remains dispersed throughout the water column from the surface to the ocean floor. From the surface to the ocean floor, saturated with cesium. Which means there's 1,000 other isotopes there too. And then think about the Chinese press back in 2013. Fukushima contamination is a serious international environmental issue, and the crisis concerns the core interests of the people who share the planet. Go ahead to 2021, and a team from China University claims no adverse side effects. In fact, Chinese universities claiming that the ocean current is actually real, and it takes about 45 days for, my apologies, 45 days for the ocean, or from pollution go from one side of the ocean to the other side of the ocean. Now, we've done research expeditions following the Fukushima nuclear meltdown from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. I just want to introduce some of that. We're almost to Egg Island up there. Seas are definitely building. I was back and forth. Towing the boat. Towing the boat with the wind behind you. Well, there's not a lot of wind. There we go. Now we're flying. Ooh, Safety Cove. It's right here, Safety Cove. And we're heading to Shearwater, about 55 miles. And we're making 2.7 miles per hour, wing on wing. So I went to Alaska year after year after year, doing a species count. We'll show you a bit of that coming up. TEPCO to abandon the Riva system, 2014, August. The Riva was the water filtration system from France, hence the name of Riva. For the last 3 years, the system has been unused and kept out of operation. Okay. Then you heard of the Alps, most likely. TEPCO unable to bring contaminated water issues under control at Fukushima. April 21st, 2014. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ALPS, has yet to function. 2014. And the utility which operates the Fukushima Daiichi plant promised to treat all contaminated water by 2015. A goal it is now emitting will not be realized. That's important, right? 2014, they say they're going to catch, they acknowledge they can't catch up. That's because I showed you both systems have never worked. But there are certain parts of the site where we don't even have control. In other words, you can't get there because of radiation, lethal doses. Also, TEPCO says groundwater bypass operations not having an effect at Fukushima. This is where they were going to direct the water from the hills to go around the plant. It was called a groundwater bypass operation. It didn't happen. Well, it did. They played with it, but they don't know if ever the pumping operation will have any tangible effects on groundwater levels. Then you also got, they were going to put a fence to stop the radiation from getting in the Pacific. They never even tried, but they said they were doing it or going to do it. And there was all this hype from the world-controlled medias. And TEPCO said they couldn't afford the $1 billion to build a fence around the whole coastline. TEPCO's ice wall operations not meeting expectations. They've yet to form an ice stopper because we can't make the temperature low enough to freeze the water. There is no ice wall. That's why it disappeared from headlines until a little blurb last week I covered on Saturday. TEPCO admits the ice wall will not stop the groundwater. So the barrier to direct is not going to work. Freezing the ground is not going to work. The fence doesn't exist. The water filtration systems are a fable. They actually never existed because the filters got so radioactive you couldn't get near them. And then using a frozen wall instead of a real wall, literally, like when you look back in human idiocracy, that's got to be the biggest one. Rather than build a real fence, they built an ice fence. It's absurd. The whole idea is absurd. $12 million a year to maintain it, and if it breaks, everything's released. There is no bottom to it. Like every way you look at it. They don't even know where the Fukushima melted cores are. And the plant is built on a river, so everything gets flushed down to the bedrock, and the river flushes it out into the Pacific Ocean. All nuclear power plants, by the way, have that attribute built where they're built. That's their oh shit plan. New map for radioactive iodine. Recorded at 1,000 feet above the grounds. Showed 3 million becquerels per square meter 20 kilometers away from the plant. These are absurd numbers because you can do a mathematical equation, extrapolate all the other isotopes with that documentation, and it's bad as it gets. EU Energy Commissioner says Fukushima is an apocalypse, everything's out of control. France says Japan has lost control, the French should leave the country. The Swiss embassy evacuates Tokyo. The energy official says Tokyo lost almost all control of events at Fukushima. Nuclear report warns on TV of an apocalyptic scenario at Fukushima. Ambassador talking about how one day this could be considered the start of the ultimate catastrophe of the world and the planet. Korea calls Japan's handling of Fukushima incompetent. That was being very polite, by the way. Fukushima radioactive tanks may have already been emptied into the oceans. In 2013, they had 1,000 steel tanks. In 2014 was 1,200 tanks. In 2017 they had 900 tanks. Try walking with both your heels on the ground. Go and shoot a video of it. You look pretty weird, I can assure you. Japan will have to dump radioactive water into the Pacific. This is 2019. And you can see on that line with my fingers to 1,000 tanks. And 2021, April of this year, stored at 1,000 tanks. Now I counted the tanks, there's only 750. So before we get into it, last year, new wind and solar that came online in 2020 was equal to 300 nuclear power plants. 261 gigawatts. And the nuclear industry is hoping to have 100 gigawatts by 2040 because they're retiring 100 gigawatts. But renewables in a single year brought on 261 gigawatts. So those who argue we absolutely must construct more nuclear plants to beat the climate emergency are clearly lunatics. And you can use compressed air storage or wind storage for excess energy. Seawater is being poisoned at a continuous rate and a source of life which our lives depend upon. In the history of science, we've never seen anything like the Fukushima plume. Why is Japan allowed to get away with contaminating the ocean? Well, they had a lot of help. Arnie Gunnarsson helped them. Here's Arnie Gunnarsson in an interview comparing Fukushima to Chernobyl.
You know, when you compare Fukushima to Chernobyl, Chernobyl may have released 20 or 30% more into the air.
So you're saying Chernobyl released 20 to 30% more radiation. Here's probably one of the scariest clips you'll ever hear.
I hired employees that could only stay on the job for 3 minutes before they exceed.
So that's you die later when you get a dose like that. If you get all of your dose in a very short period, that's considered a lethal dose. Your organs start melting. He didn't say nuclear scientists or nuclear corp companies or stuff like that. What he's talking about, referring to, is the day workers, the transients. 2021 was a record year of growth for renewable energies worldwide. They brought it on 290 gigawatts this year of renewables, and the year's not over yet. Still got a whole month left. So that's equivalent this year to 333 nuclear power plants worth of renewables. It's amazing. It's just wonderful news, isn't it? And away we go. Tracking contaminated water from Fukushima nuclear action. They're talking about dumping. They're trying to divert you away from what really has already happening and has been happening for the last 10 years. And so that's why we got a poll tonight. Where's my poll? Should university deans who fund and allow fake studies like China just did, we're covering tonight, be banned from universities. We got 15 votes up, or 15 votes with 87%. I can't believe that 13% would say no. So, first off, what they don't want you to think about is what's already happened. These are models up to 12th of May, this particular model of 2011. And you can see the radiation is covering the planet because the model is only based on venting. It's not based on the actual meltdown losses, the inventories, the reactor fuel. It doesn't have that included in that model. So the model will cover the entire planet. The model you're looking at is based on venting to stop it from blowing up. That's how sick the industry is. There's a sickness in nuclear industries. A study impact strength of cesium on the west coast of the United States in 2012 was estimated to be as high as 4%. There's another headline from 2012. The radioactive water reached 3,200 kilometers east of Fukushima 6 months before that. Now, once again, the planet got covered. The oceans were covered. Cesium was dispersed from the surface to the ocean floor as quick as the plume, within days of the plume. Because it's a continuous plume covering the whole planet, covering all the ocean at one time. It doesn't avoid the water, right? Fukushima Daiichi contaminated the biggest body of water on the planet, 2013. The whole Pacific Ocean likely to have, and see again when you hear cesium, they're poking you in the eye so you don't think about the real isotopes. The peak nuclear bomb testing 5 to 10 times higher. So the study that China just put out is outrageous propaganda. It's outrageous. It gets worse though, unfortunately. IAEA experts predict radioactive cesium will be carried across the Pacific to the US and Canada in 1 or 2 years. So they want you to believe that it's only ocean-borne, right? They don't want you to think about the airborne radiation, which is perpetual faller because it's a continuous plume. It never stops falling out. You never stop breathing it in. The insects and the animals and the mammals and the birds are constantly breathing this stuff in. It's sequestering in their muscles, their organs, and their bones, and their bodies under siege, attacking the isotopes in their bodies, insects and birds and mammals, animals and humans alike. Nobody's immune from this stuff. This plume is based on 19 days, 468 hours. It's based again on venting. But what you got to realize also is this is global warming. This is why you see supercell storms, believe it or not, and you'll understand it here tonight eventually, if you're not familiar with it. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second. Do you know how much energy it actually takes to make something like that happen? It's a lot, right? This does it every second. Pulsing energy at the speed of light. That's why my Geiger counter is picking up there in real time. We're in the studio here. Discharges of Fukushima nuclear material in the Pacific have effectively contaminated the sea. 2013. 156 quadrillion becquerels. Again, they only acknowledge gamma, cesium, double Chernobyl, getting close to total fallout from every atomic bomb test in history. It was still in the basement after the detonations and meltdowns. So there's lots of models of the radioactive fallout in the ocean. They're trying to make you think that the only thing you should worry about is if the Japanese government starts releasing stuff from empty tanks. They're actually empty tanks Because if you fill the tanks up, I'll show you that coming up, the doses are so high you can't get back on the site, and you certainly couldn't build another tank on the site. Lethal threat from Fukushima highly radioactive water flowing into the Pacific. Fukushima contamination in the ocean reached Alaska in under a month. And the U.S. West Coast to be hit by Fukushima contamination. Again, as I showed you, it was airborne within 5 days. It covered the North United States of America and Canada. And by day 6, it was on the East Coast. Day 7, day 8, day 9, it was almost across into Europe. By 14 days, by the 31st of March, it was a continuous plume. It's not like your car backfire and there's this puff of smoke drifting along. If this was a continuous snowstorm that you can physically see it and you had to shovel it and whine about it, you'd get it in a hurry then, wouldn't you? That doesn't stop. You get it in a hurry then, wouldn't you? A continuous snowstorm in March that doesn't stop even in 2021 is still going strong. Then you get it. You can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. Does that mean it doesn't exist? My Geiger counter acknowledges gamma. Fukushima ocean plume hit Canada 6 months ago. Precedes model prediction by years. Radioactive iodines at 7.5 million times the legal limit in water around Fukushima. Cesium at 1.1 million. There's so many of these different types of headlines. There's something else that reported on it. Lots of models that downplayed it, but nevertheless acknowledged that it had some nasty attributes. All-time radiation levels in wells at the Pacific. These are wells where he dug it and they got pumps hooked up to it and it pumps up water. The stuff that's coming up, you can't get near enough that. It's all for show and tell. It's not, you can't physically use it. You're pumping up millions and millions of becquerels per cubic centimeter. And they're saying 1.1 billion per cubic meter, 1,000 liters of strontium-90 and other beta emitters. It's because you don't want to talk about curium, which is the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker for curium than you do for plutonium. Walls are cracked below the ground at the reactor buildings, as if the damage above ground isn't enough to worry about. If you're not familiar, go back and watch What is Fukushima on my site to see lots of documentation about the buildings and such. And next week we're going to try to cover around 2,500 pictures from the beginning. Really enlightening stuff for sure. Why is Japan allowed to get away with contaminating the ocean? Because they own the world, and the nuclear industry has captured the regulators and the medias and the universities and key positions in governments. So we at some point we're going to have to deal with that, because they're going to exterminate the planet if we don't. It's an environmental disaster. Washington Post. Radioactivity levels in the oceans hundreds of times above what they call normal. Countries around the Pacific are worried about ongoing Fukushima leaks. Leaks. This is NOAA's model, by the way. The radioactive fallout was leaked into the internet. Nobody knows who put it out there, but it's been authenticated as from the government. Huge amounts of radioactive tritium. So, first off, the water is 2.2 sieverts or so per liter. That's the consensus. And what that means is a gallon of it, if it was here on the desk, I'd be dead before I got this far into the video. And so would 1 million people that walk past it each day if you put it at the bus station or at the subways or something. It's lethal on a whole different level. Saying tritium is being evil. When you got, you can't measure tritium at a nuclear meltdown because it's loaded with beta and alpha and gamma and neutrons. uranium, plutonium. The last thing you're going to be able to measure is tritium, because tritium is a weak emitter. It's a radioactive emitter. It's nasty, but you're not going to be able to measure it because of the signals from the 1,000 other fission products are going to be in the same sample. The same thing with cesium. Cesium has been used for 75 years to indoctrinate the population into thinking that that's it. That's all you got to think about. It's like in the sea is likely to return to Japan in 20, 30 years. Well, a lot quicker than that. This sailor was talking about a professional sailor that professionally sails the ocean on race ships worth millions of dollars. So after we left Japan, I felt that the ocean itself was dead. No longer saw turtles or dolphins or sharks or birds, and saw one whale that appeared helpless with a tumor on its head. Fukushima radiation, possible culprit in a huge starfish die-off from Mexico to Alaska. Fukushima radiation, because starfish use water the same as we use blood. Fears marine life is being poisoned by the nuclear material flowing from the Pacific. Experts warn of festering radioactive sores contaminating the food chain. The food chain. Fukushima radioactive plume will continue to hit the shores of the United States and Canada for decades. It's impossible to remove the molten cores for hundreds of years, if ever. And the flow of contamination for the plant will be virtually impossible to stop. I launched research expeditions within a couple of years. And we've done it year after year after year after year. And we've done species counts from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska, where there's 27,000 islands that are now stripped. We've done the whole coastline year after year.
We got the big one up.
Year after year after year. And what did I discover was that you can fill the coastline up with people at low tide, and the species to the left are permanently eradicated, permanently exterminated. That should really make you hopefully appreciate what's left on the planet, because it's being exterminated, and so are you. Expect 7,000 plus species in the tidal zones. They're gone. And this is right by Alaska. And I'll take my dog in to let her have a little pee. The tide is super low tide. It's a perfect day. You can see this. We're right by Alaska, so it's very unusual to see it this calm.
Take a pee for
And there's no color on the coastlines.
Yeah.
So look at the shoreline. Low tide. There's nothing anywhere. There's nothing anywhere. And so when you see the species to the left, remember the video you just watched. The pictures to the left is what it's supposed to look like, the entire coastline, including Alaska. So they got marine snow, radioactive fallout covers the ocean floor at least 2,000 kilometers away in that particular documentation. This is my documentation. These are before and after, authentic pictures in the same place. There is no species to the left or to the right. The species to the left, you'll never take those pictures again. Radioactive sea spray has been known to blow hundreds of kilometers inland. So Fukushima has already wiped out the species. You can see the species to the left are now exterminated. They're exterminated. Incredible, beautiful, wonderful. And we were warned that deteriorating power plant threatens mass extinction around the world. Well, that's what it looks like to the right. It's exterminated. It does that with radioactive fallout. This was the Xenon-133. It'll burn a hole right through your lungs and sequester in your bones And like your pelvis, you produce stem cells for your white blood cells, right? All the species to the left are now permanently extinct. You'll never take those pictures again. And usually the weather looked like this. This is what a typical day looked like on the research year after year. It's the same thing here. At the end of the day, it's always brutal. So the Fukushima radioactive plume has already wiped out the entire coastline of British Columbia and California and the west coast to Alaska. That's confirmed, eh? I've done that every day for about 5 to 6 months a year. So that's a real map from 2013. But it's only based on venting. It's not based on the documentation. This study that came out today from China is meant to distract people away from the truth. Disgusting. So should the dean of that university in China be banned from universities? That's the poll today. That's the poll today. Should university deans who fund and allow fake studies like China just did be banned? I think they should be banned and then put in jail. By the way, if you go out and release it off the coastline like they've done for 30 years, dumped it in the ocean, all different countries, it ends up on the coastline, blows into the communities. And the harm will go on for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. In the case of Fukushima, what we discovered along the coastline was in the forest of 27,000 island stretch. We covered year after year after year for 4 to 5 months a year. There was nothing in the forest. The forests were eradicated too. New York Times, ocean life faces mass extinction. We may be on the precipice of a major extinction event in marine wildlife. And as I showed you, we definitely are. 100%. And that was grueling. That was brutal. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy to go do what I'd done. I originally was doing it, I was still in a wheelchair. We lost the wheelchair overboard and I had to make a decision. Was I going to keep going? And what would you do if you were in my shoes? You had no choice but to keep going. I spent 10 years in a hospital bed, 5 years in a wheelchair, learning to stand up and get out and get around again finally. And then 3 years on sticks, still back and forth to the wheelchair, but 3 years on sticks, learning to walk again. And I'm not a very healthy person, obviously, right? And then I had to go out and run all over the coastline year after year after year because we couldn't find anybody telling the truth. And so I paid the price. I paid the piper many times over. Impossible to remove hundreds of radioactive materials and 1,200 radionuclides. So what I do now is a public service for this planet, where I do the research. I provide documentation also. We do presentations to keep this fresh in the public's minds, the investors' minds, the policymakers, and everybody else. And we do it as I am responsible too for what goes on on this planet. And I have an obligation to the species to stand up for the species and for the people that don't know any better. But particularly for the species, we all have an obligation to be a voice because they don't have a voice. I don't speak dog and cat, neither do you, okay? I don't speak horse or cow or ostrich or seagull, but somebody has to speak for them. Dead animals litter the California beaches, and so I put together this humble operation that has gone to war every day now for many, many years for this planet. I wake up every day and I go to war. Graveyards of washed up sea life, influx malnourished creatures emaciated. The animals are starving to death, covered in sores, stunted growths, weak immune systems are compromised, mind-blowing die-off in the Pacific. The deaths puzzling government scientists. I've never heard of such a thing anywhere in the world. Reports beaches full of bodies, countless carcasses. In fact, last year, number for the grey whales alone was over 6,000 dead grey whales in 5 years. The majority of them were confirmed as emaciated. Pollution from Fukushima release will spread widely, but there's almost no danger. This was a study out of China today that got a lot of traction. And I'll show you the whole thing coming up in a bit. This year's decision of Japanese government to dump radioactive water from Fukushima into the Pacific. So they got you thinking about 2023. A new study may revive that by showing tritium, a hydrogen 3. It's called H3, tritium H3. There's no such thing as tritium from a reactor, it's tritium H3. And so the media took the study on purpose, is what it was all about. And this really upset me today too. After the 2011 disaster of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, an image became widely shared. This was the public relation firms done this. Supposedly representing the spread of radiation from the leaks, and these are destroyed reactors, by the way, into the ocean. In fact, the map was nothing of the sort. Instead, it represented the height of the waves from the tsunami. This was Noah's tsunami mark, right? But in reality, there was real maps available for anybody that even tried. So what illness of the mind must people have to lie about the threat? Because this one is Noah's of the tsunami, but that one is Noah's of the cesium. So they perpetrated this one out there. When you bought into it, then they ridiculed you. But everybody would have had access to many models like that one there. And so the study, there's this phenomenon if you're paying attention to this. First off, there's 4.3 million studies produced in North America every year. Who knows how many is in Asia and China, right? 4 scientific journals accept fake studies about Star Wars. 4 journals. Journals got dubbed into publishing a fake Star Wars study because that's what they publish all the time, is studies from public relation firms to win over the population with propaganda. Information overload fuels fake news study. A recent record, major publisher retracting more than 100 studies from the Cancer Journal. I mean, the lowest of lows, when you're doing fake studies about cancer, this is absurdness. They should be arrested. Retraction note to multiple articles in tumor biology because of fake studies about cancer. Phony peer review, the more we look, the more we find. Fake peer review hits the RSC journals. Paging Dr. Fraud, the fake publishers that are ruining science, which is all of our universities now, isn't it? Peer review fraud hacking the scientific publication press. China cracks down on fake peer reviews. You kind of get where I'm leading to, right? Well, China needs to crack down on these people that produced this study. Too sweet, baby. How close is Fukushima nuclear accident contaminated water to us? So they only include tritium. It's disgusting. It's incredibly disgusting that people like this actually exist. So this is their model based on 600 days. Look. Now I showed you a lot of documentation already. The ocean was covered in radiation from the surface to the ocean floor in less than a week. And it wasn't tritium, I guarantee you that. But imagine what kind of incredible creatures they got to be. You know, there was over 6 million pounds of fish found in South Korea that was contaminated. They had to ship back. 6 million pounds. 6 million cancers. You tell me that the ocean is not already polluted? Well, how do you get 6 million pounds of radioactive fish? Who knows how many millions got through, right? 2,620 days, they're claiming that's what it's going to look like. Japan nuclear expert, people all over the world need to be informed. This is the first case in history where so much contaminated water is flowing into the ocean. That's 2013. Study, fuel material introduced to the Pacific Ocean via drains, resulting in potentially serious contamination of the marine environment. This is day 2,800, 2,900, day 3,100, 3,000, day 3,300. And this is only tritium, see? These are scumbags. The people that done this, these are incredible, dangerous scumbags. These are incredible, despicable people that could produce that study. These are revolting, despicable cowards. I wouldn't trust them with a paper bag. Alarming reality of Fukushima Daiichi, the plant faces with new crisis, and TEPCO is clearly just hanging on day by day. The homeless and destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language there is no nuclear science there, scientists, no academics, there's no nuclear corporations going there. It's a coward industry, has no right to exist. It's a murderous ecocide, omnicide industry. Alarming reality. Vast areas of 60 million people contaminated and huge contamination. It's still melting down, for goodness sakes. TEPCO to dump groundwater from Fukushima into the Pacific Ocean, trying to avoid a total collapse of the system for handling radioactive water, 2013. Well, I showed you in 2014, both the Arriva and the ALPS system had never worked a single time. TEPCO reverses position amidst Fukushima plant groundwater is contaminated. It wants to dump it into the Pacific. That's all they've done with it. You can't put it in the tanks. I already showed you. I'll show you again. Fukushima plant is hemorrhaging, and they don't know where it's coming from. Why is it coming out now? Nuclear material flowing into the ocean is a grave matter, and the situation at Fukushima is deplorable. Water now at Fukushima plant is 3 times more cesium than Chernobyl's total. Underscores the scale of a never-ending threat. It's absurdly more than that. It's absurd numbers. If it was only 3, I probably wouldn't even be doing it. Fukushima is terrifying. Day 3,840, and the despicable scum only modeled tritium. The disgusting parasites trying to disarm this planet and endanger everybody on this planet. I won't buy nothing from China until those guys are dealt with. Urgent situation after frightening discovery at Fukushima. The planned ice wall shows TEPCO is grasping at straws, and the plant is leaking like a sieve. 900 straight days of contamination flowing into the Pacific. And then China's out there producing studies on tritium, trying to disarm the whole planet. No, don't look at Fukushima. It's just tritium. I can't possibly articulate what kind of evil these people actually are. Fukushima plant is in uncharted territories. highly evaporated water to be boiled until it evaporates? Or dumped into the ocean? Boiled until it evaporates, rather than storing it. Boiled until it's evaporated. Because you can't filter it, see? And you don't want to store it because that costs money. They'll kill the planet rather than spend $50. Government admits water poured into the ocean is highly contaminated. Going on for 2 years. Nuclear leak poisons the Pacific. We're talking about the Pacific Ocean. The people of Japan are responsible for poisoning the world food chain. The buck has to stop somewhere. A team from Tishiko University in China developed the models, the fake models. You cowards, you gross, disgusting cowards. Your parents should be put in labor camps for the rest of their lives for having you. On day 3600, the pollutants will cover almost the entire Pacific Ocean. Enormous amount of Fukushima contamination flowing from the Fukushima will probably imperil the entire Pacific Ocean. There's the real stuff. Threatens the food chain. Well, first off, it covered the whole planet in less than 2 weeks. So China putting out that model is such a dangerous thing to do, to disarm the entire population of the planet. That's what you're doing, right? It's such a dangerous thing to do. Like, this is where we should be working together. Worsening radioactive contamination of the sea will soon awaken the whole world, which is what needs to happen and will happen at some point. And the industry is hoping to eke out another little while of nobody being aware. They're hoping to bury it. They're hoping you never figures it out. And then if you take, look, I already take the bashing for a decade. I've been bashed nonstop for a decade. Endless trolls come here and wreck me and attack me and lie about me all over the place. I don't hide away from anybody, ever. Don't use the tactics they use. I bring you the documentation and I work all day so I can do it again tomorrow. And when I can, I'm out doing the research, and it's horrifying. It's an endless nightmare to live in my shoes. It's an endless, relentless, 24 hours a day. It's a nightmare. Corpses of sea lions, birds, and sea turtles just decomposing. 13 baby gray whales. 13 baby whales being found is madness. And 55 dolphins found dead on the west coast. Rash of humpback, because there is a still ongoing humpback mortality events. Mysterious deadly black fungus being found on fish in the Pacific Northwest. Now, I was reporting that. I was out there on the ocean in those years, and fishermen were asking me about the fungus they're seeing on the majority of the fish. Little green starlights, highly contaminated marine snow covering the ocean floor 2,000 kilometers. Killer whales were emaciated and still are for years and years now since Fukushima. Owls found dead, hemorrhaging, and badly emaciated. Pelicans starving, emaciated. They're eating the baby birds for food. Sardine crash. And that had that trickle effect because they're a feeder fish for many species, right? Mass death of sea lions, dolphins, birds. Caribou in Alaska, big decline. Mortality is very high, low survival rates. Giant whales found dead up and down the Pacific Northwest coast. 25 carcasses in the past month baffled scientists. Now, pre-2015, you didn't hear scientists talking about ship strikes, right, or entanglement, or you didn't hear them talking about climate change or net zero. No, but after the Paris Accord You can't even read the news anymore. They can't gobble them on us. Continuing trend of whales washing ashore, sick, starving, emaciated. 0 babies survive on an island, usually 15,000, extremely poor, emaciated. Marine mammals, extremely emaciated. Carts filled with emaciated dead bodies. Babies being found of seals, emaciated. Unprecedented largest animals on Earth found dead, emaciated. Food supplies missing. Mind-blowing die-offs of seabirds on their way from Mexico to Alaska. Every bird we're seeing is starving to death. 100% death rates of baby seals, emaciated animals, emaciated birds. More have washed up in the last few months than all of recorded history. 2015. Now the entire coast, whole populations dying off, emaciated, all ages, not just newborns. Walking skeletons. Countless dead birds, nothing will eat the bodies. Salmons covered in fungus, red lesions all over, beak gapping sores. Extinction concern. It could be the end. Indonesia rushes to save whales. More than 400 whales beached themselves in New Zealand. 200 whales stranded themselves in New Zealand. 600 pilot whales washed ashore in New Zealand over the past 2 days. Whales won't stop killing themselves in New Zealand, in fact. 51 pilot whales died Friday in a mass stranding. Less than a week after 145 pilot whales and 9 pygmy killer whales perished in 2 other unrelated strandings. And in the latest strandings, 90 pilot whales beached themselves in Chatham Island. Remember these stories? Right, because the radioactive fallout is symmetrical. It covers the whole planet, breaks up the food chain. And the migratory, like whales, they migrate 6,000 to 10,000 kilometers. And so by the time they get to where they're going, if they don't find nutrition, they go from 13 inches of blubber down to 2 or 3, and then they die because their immune system now is completely compromised. This model was from France, by the way. Desperate bid to save the whole pod of 12 beached whales. These were... They saved 6 of them, apparently, right. They were sperm whales, big sperm whales. Whole pods of them running up on beaches and dying. And there's obviously they're emaciated. Official blast Japanese government over Fukushima, such immoral people that they let the radioactive substances flow out freely and said nothing while contaminating the ocean is just absurd. And now they're trying to cover the whole thing up. There was mass mortality events for minke whales, still ongoing, by the way. 10 sperm whales also washed up in Yorkshire in Scotland. 2019 grey whale unusual mortality event still continues this year. Same with the humpback mortality event. The North Atlantic great whale unusual mortality event is still going on in 2021. You got unusual mortality events declared for sea lions. 70% of all newborns may be dying. Add the krill and mussels to the list of unusual marine deaths. So it's not just whales, unusual mortality events. There's many, many species. And then we've seen this dolphin in particular. They claimed that the 7-foot dolphin was found with a 2-foot faucet and a hose in its stomach. That's simply not true. It was shoved after it washed up on the beach. Somebody shoved it in their mouth. And who else would do that but a reporter? Because who's going to believe a dolphin ate that in their right minds? Dolphins don't just eat random stuff, right? Second stranded dolphin found in the area with a belly full of garbage in a month. It was shocking that they actually ran that. That really bugged me. Whales won't stop killing themselves from anywhere on the planet. It's not just New Zealand. Since Fukushima, though. All of this is since Fukushima. Everything you've seen is since Fukushima. This model is based on the Neptunium-239, which decays to plutonium-239, covering the whole planet. That's TEPCO's numbers. Endangered killer whales make appearances. Matriarchs of British Columbia whales starving to death, actually emaciated with a peanut head. Another adult southern killer whale and her calf were emaciated. They had what they call the peanut heads. And I went out there many times and documented the whales, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Hundreds of times. I was trying to shoot that eagle from the cabin door. What have I got done here? Oh, sorry.
That is freaking nuts. And it won't stop.
Yeah, you never see that. He's in distress. Wow. Alaska seabird die-off continues for another summer. Millions of birds being found emaciated, had starved to death. And of course, birds, right, as I showed you earlier, the coastline, there was nothing on the coastline for the birds to eat. So when you can't find, and so it's not just one type of bird, you're talking about storm petrels and fulmars and shearwaters, kittiwaks, auklets, Cassini auklets, and puffins. And even the bears are showing up emaciated. Now the biggest part of the bear's diet is berries and grass and roots and grub. And so they're trying to blame the bears being emaciated because the berries bioaccumulate radiation brutally. In British Columbia this summer, 5 million sockeye salmon were expected to return and spawn, but only 600,000 came, and the local grizzly bears. So they're trying to say the bears are emaciated because there wasn't enough salmon. But that's not actually how it works. Bears can eat moose and elk and deer and black bear, and they eat mostly, though, grass and berries. And problem is, berries bioaccumulate radiation dramatically. Mysterious mass deaths of Alaskan seabirds. At one point, there was 1.4 million Cassini, or there was a million Cassini auklets. There was 1.4 million common murres. And they can dive, well, they dive every day of their life because they're genetically designed to do it, up to 600 feet deep for squid and anchovies and krill and herring, etc., etc. And they were all emaciated. Plus, they can fly long, because normally you can go to the coastline, just eat mussels, sea cucumbers, oysters. There's 6,500 invertebrates without the backbones living in the 700 algae, right? But they were all wiped out. There's incredible diversity. So the birds couldn't even go to the coastline to get substance. And this, they're talking about the common murres. There was 1.4 million of them that starved to death. They appeared emaciated. We know they're starving because their stomachs are empty. 150 whales found beached in Australia. Few survive. Humans are sleepwalking into a mass extinction of species not seen since the dinosaur because they won't acknowledge what's really going on. La 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 la, it can't happen to me. I'm better than radiation. It can't hurt me. I'm special. I'm special. That's what you see going on there, too. Never before have so many Gilberti whales died on Brazilian beaches this year. 103 stranded across the country in 2017. So we're seeing this right around the whole world is what we're seeing. A disturbing question. What's behind the numbers? So the apologist gets quoted. He said, no, it's the deaths are associated with increase in population. More whales mean necessarily more whales killed by natural causes. But of course, they don't even believe that because they say Researchers search for explanations. The deaths of the sea giants continue to shock the human population, and we have never seen anything like this before. But the apologists look, no, that's because there's lots of them. They're dying naturally. Have a nice day. Send me my check. That was a university professor. They're all just some weird demonic creature now. You don't even have, will the day ever come when we can trust scientists again? I doubt it. It looks like those days are gone. 5 giant dead whales all wash ashore near one another. The odds of finding 2 dead whales on the same beach pre-Fukushima was astronomical. You had better chances of getting hit by a Soviet satellite in the next 3 seconds. Now it's normal. Now if you don't find a whole bunch on the beach, like, really, that's weird, only one. Federal government issues a disaster declaration for the Alaska pink salmon. The true amount of dying marine and bird life in the area recently is astonishing. The amount of marine and bird life dying in the area is astonishing. They got a whole list below of different species dying off. That's crazy. 337 whales. These were large whales in different stages of decomposition. This is madness. That's the definition of madness. And they're all emaciated. They're obviously emaciated. Like when you look at the whale, that's an obvious emaciated whale that doesn't have anywhere near the right shape. Because Fukushima, nothing escapes it. And so, pre-Fukushima, this story here gives you an idea. In the 10 years before Fukushima, they only found 6 puffins washed up. In the previous 10 years. And in just shy of 3 weeks, they've seen 250. And they believe the numbers will be much higher. Because it's usually only finding, by the way, about 10% of the whales are birds. So it points to half the puffin population in the North Pacific may be dead. So they extrapolated from finding 250 birds that half the puffins of the Pacific Northwest would be dead in order for them to find 250. So when you find like 1.4 million common murres and 1 million Cassini auklets, the world shark attacks drop worldwide and in Florida. These are curious questions. Why would shark attacks drop worldwide? What could be a catalyst for that? Well, and by the way, Fukushima fallout spiked the year after 3/11. So originally you got all these buildings with reactor cores stored in the fuel pools detonating. It's madness. It's all madness, boy. Let's rush through the rest of it. Deaths of pelicans, turtles, dolphins, manatees dying in droves. That's still going on, right? Scientists fear this is the beginning of a devastating ecosystem collapse. Dead sea lions everywhere. Never seen anything like it. No oceanographic explanation for what we're seeing. 2013. They start coming up with excuses in 2015 and they stuck to them. Oh, it's ships and entanglement. Even though they're clearly emaciated. Shellfish gone near damaged nuke plant, likely extinct because of Fukushima nuclear crisis. Physician reports increased cancers around nuclear power plants, birth defects, stillbirths, spontaneous abortions on the rises. Nations across the Pacific are fearing the impact of Fukushima. Many expecting cancer will increase in the Pacific Rim, but there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries can manifest long before cancer is diagnosed. Heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. There's 1,800 illnesses. And because once your immune system gets compromised, because it's fighting radiation all day with white blood cells for the rest of your life, You have less red blood cells carrying oxygen, nutrition throughout your body. You're more susceptible to everything that comes your way. So it's a melt through. So Fukushima fuel is definitely down in the groundwater and flown into the Pacific against international pretty quick. May already be at the west coast. Now, I showed you the radioactive fallout. It hit the west coast in just 5-6 days. It covered the planet in about 14 days. Certainly at 40 days, it's now coming around again. It's lapping the planet, right, with radioactive fallout, and still hemorrhaging out. State of emergency. Lawmakers said declare a state of emergency right away and intervene in Fukushima, Japan, professor. Issue SOS. Now it's really an emergency. International help is, well, the problem with that story is that never changes. In 1,000 years, we're still going to have to go deal with Fukushima at some point. Fukushima melted fuels drifting to the ocean, then on the land. It's, every day there's tens of thousands of miles of rain clouds are picked up out of the ocean, brought into continents. These are radioactive rain clouds. So even if everything falls out of the sky, you're still hammered endless, because a lot of radiation on the continent, when it lands on the continent, runs downhill to the oceans. Ultimate worst case scenario on the way at Fukushima. Experts suspect intense contamination is seeping. You always hear these words, seeping and bleeding and leaking. This is not an accident, okay? They're very disciplined in telling the story and not using any words that will get your imagination working. The buildings are completely, unequivocally destroyed. It's not leaking out of any of the buildings. It's hemorrhaging. That's reactor 3 to the left and 4 to the right. These were 190-foot reactor buildings, and you had 40 years of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings. They're also gone too. These were, at the time, the biggest reactors on the planet, and there's multiple reactors missing. We're talking about generations being affected. How are those in charge getting away with this time after time by just saying sorry? What do we tell the younger generations about what happened to our oceans? Fears are mounting. Fukushima radiation could lead to dangerous contamination levels in seafood. At least for now, the fish are not glowing, so eat up. National Geographic, which is Rupert Murdoch, a disgusting coward to write something like that. At least for now, the fish are not glowing. As if that's the harbinger. It's just... how do you say it? I wonder, right? Like, apathy don't really do it justice, what we're seeing. Japanese government lost all credibilities. Conditions never seen before with scientists in the Pacific seals and walruses. Thyroid cyst lesions in reproductive systems, retained placentae. TEPCO's admit not working on plans to stop the Fukushima radioactive leaks. Severe impact on oceanic environments. Japanese simply dumping nuclear waste into the ocean. It's a major event worldwide. Leaked Godzilla trailer hits the web, features voice of nuclear pioneer. Now I've become death. Oppenheimer, Robert J. Oppenheimer, the destroyer. Now I've become death, the destroyer of worlds. And they were showing pictures of Fukushima in the background, apparently. Complete collapse of the sardine population, west coast of Canada, which means you're going to affect all the birds, all the migratory species. Top scientist, Fukushima's most terrifying situation I can imagine. And I've seen a paper which says it's bye-bye Japan, and to evacuate the North America west coast if Unit 4 goes after a quake and the rods are exposed. So imagine your power plant breaking down. You have to evacuate a country like Japan and the West Coast 5,000 miles away because a power plant broke down. Do you really think this is an accident? You know what I mean? I don't understand why the planet won't fight back. I don't understand why we're not gone to war against the nuclear industry already. Because I certainly am. Collapse of species feared. We're almost through. The Fukushima crisis comes to the US, the new and improved version of the original atomic plague. And the truth is so incomprehensible, it's easier to pretend it doesn't exist. Former Japan Prime Minister seals polar bears are dying after Fukushima radiation exposure. Because of the big pulse, right? When the ice melts. 28% of the polar bears with skin lesions and hair loss and thyroids tested by the government, like symptoms in seals and walruses. Surprisingly high mortality in musk oxes. High rates of embryo deaths and bad eggs for geese. Die off of mammals, birds and reptiles. So many diseases afflicting such a wide variety of animals. Names out of the science-fi thrillers. Hemorrhagic diseases, sylvatic plagues. Nuclear expert Fukushima is very critical for the entire humankind. And Japan won't let foreign experts visit. Radioactive emissions are still taking place all the time. Pouring contamination in the ocean may cause the elimination of fish as a resource. Scientists present link between Alaska seal deaths and Fukushima fallout, skin lesions, hair loss, lethargic, pulse releases when the buildup of radionuclides was set free as the ice melts, wildlife health implications due to radiation exposure is discussed. Legendary musician, am I upset about Fukushima poison in the Pacific Ocean? Yeah. Am I upset about TEPCO and Japan government lying through their teeth? Yeah. Scientists warns of new floods of radioactive particles. Those who escaped the initial fallout can now be exposed. And people in coastal areas at particular risk. The work at Fukushima plant to go on for 10,000 years. It's longer than a human experience. And it's true about 70% of Japan is polluted, which means every time you have rain or typhoon hit Japan, washes absurd amount of radiation into the ocean because the whole country is radioactive. Every year the whole country is hemorrhaging radioactive pollen. It's terrifying how the Pacific ecosystem has collapsed. Tell me about it. Plutonium uranium spread throughout the food chain. Pacific wasteland. All decontamination systems stopped working and may not restart for a long time, which I showed you that earlier. Both the Riva and the ALP system wasn't used at all. Even worse news of Fukushima, radioactive water has formed pathways. It's flowing straight into the Pacific. Fukushima plant is out of control. And we'll just wash uranium out to the ocean because there's a river underneath it, right? Fukushima is dumping nuclear fuel into the Pacific, and plutonium is named after the devil. And the view of a nuclear advocate is a little sociopathic. The entire biosphere at risk from poisons, fatal to everything with replicating cells. Man-made radiation is 1 billion times more toxic than industrial poisons. That's true for animals, insects, and birds too, not just humans, right? It's predicted, in fact, that radioactive particles may concentrate as much on the west coast as anywhere in Fukushima as it keeps coming in waves after waves after wave. Fukushima is the most important, on TV, is the most important issue going on in the world. And everyone should stop what they're doing and work together. Newspaper editor, government's afraid to look into Fukushima's could lead to destruction of the fishery industries. But that statement, Fukushima is the most important issue going on in the world, that everyone should stop what they're doing and work together, is what's going to happen at some point. So why not do it now? Well, I'm going to try to get in the woods tomorrow and look for birds and rabbits. I think we're supposed to get 80-kilometer wind tomorrow and heavy rain, so probably won't get in, but I'll be trying. And if not, I'll get in Saturday and Sunday. Anyway, we made it through. How many clicks did we do tonight, Dana? 490 clicks for everybody tonight. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Click, 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 click. Click, click. I click when I click. I ain't scared of no click. What do I got going for a poll tonight? Dana? Should university deans who fund and allow fake studies like China just did be banned from universities? We got 91% say yes. So there, na 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 na. We're gonna end that poll. Ending poll, sir. The poll is now officially ended. Shout out to everybody. Can't believe we made it through. Takes all day to do this, and you sit there and go click, 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 click 500 times, it's over. And you're like, fuck, that went fast. Tree Fruit, Dana Nasana, good night, everybody. Chuck, Port Angeles, Marjorie Evans, hi Marge. P. Sawyer, Andrew B. Colette S. Angelica, I can't even pronounce names tonight. Bloop. James Lucid. And sometimes it'll do that. I should have had a drink of water a half an hour ago. Hi, James. PBS lover. Chit. Mike Mansfield. Hi, everybody. Good night, everybody. Only serve one king. Lori. Ella. Pretty straightforward tonight. Yeah, good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow and the weekend. If that's possible. I mean, these videos are... So I got enough documentation here. You can beat the nuclear industry in court any day of the week. You can certainly beat up those Japanese academics that produced that fake study. And we didn't bring the study up on the screen, did we? Hang on, I'll bring it up right quick. I think I will. The actual study. I read it earlier, and it's really discharge. So you got all these academics right there. These are incredible scumbags. These incredible degenerates. So if you click on PDF, that'll take you to the study. It's an open study because they want propaganda to go everywhere, right? And they say radioactive materials diffuse into the oceans is a new branch of science. Really? Well, they've been dumping it for 75 years in the ocean. You really think it's a new science? I think you people, China should hang you people. China likes to hang people. You deserve to be hung for what you're doing. You're the lowest forms of life in human history for what you've done with that study. It's just an incredibly horrific thing to do to your fellow humans and to the 8 million species. is to produce fake studies so you can pretend that you're a good person when obviously you're not. Night, everybody. Who did I miss? Organic Slant. Right there. Catcha. But I mean, where does it end, you know? If you don't call them out and try to hold them accountable, they'll never stop. There's no incentive for them not to be evil. And that's what we got to create. We got to create an incentive, and we should use the deans of the university as their first example, so the next dean doesn't allow the professors to be monsters. Yeah, good night, Robert. Good night, everybody. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. A bit of a struggle this week, keeping everything moving forward. I'm so burnt out, it's not funny. A couple days rest, we'll be back. 325 counts per minute on my Geiger counter. 334 counts per minute. That's madness, folks. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody in a couple of days. God bless. There's 29 people